Good afternoon, everyone. I'd love to call this meeting to order and welcome our guests today. We will be having presentations. Actually, I might as well adopt the agenda before we move on to that. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda, please? Lynn Lunt. And a special welcome this afternoon to our guests from Elections PEI, Tim Garrity and Paul Allen and Emma Drake, here to present to us today on behalf of Elections PEI on elected school boards and what that might look like and some of the challenges that we may see there. So would you prefer, if the committee has questions, that we wait until after the presentation?
Not at all. If there's any questions, by all means, you can stop us as we're going through. I don't have a problem with that at all.
Okay, so if there's any burning questions, maybe give me a wave, and otherwise we can, it's kind of usual practice to wait till the end, but if there's any burning questions, we'll ask those. So without any further ado, you can take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much to yourself, Chair, and to the committee for inviting us here today. As you all know, we're the full staff of Elections PEI. We just put a little note in the door that said we'd be down here, but I think we'll be all right for a couple hours this afternoon. But we're the nonpartisan independent office of the Ledge, and you know, we run provincial school boards, or school board elections, the French school board elections, provincial elections, by-elections that we're anxiously anticipating right now, any plebiscites and referendums. So we're involved in all of that for the province. And we were kind of asked to be here. We've been working with the Department of Education a little bit on presenting some options and what potential elected school boards, and we talk about both English and French as to what those could look like, some of the logistics around those, some of the challenges, some of the pros and cons and things that we might encounter. So we've got some options here that we're ready to discuss. And other than that, I'll kind of get right into it. So what we're going to be talking about today basically is the logistical side of running the elections, not really the context as to the governance around elected school boards and things like that. So it's really the nuts and bolts of running the actual elections itself. So each of you has a document, and I think it was circulated prior to the meeting, but you have a printed copy as well in front of you. So we'll kind of go through, these are the options that we've kind of discussed and crafted a little bit more information around right now. So the first option that we were kind of approached on and people were talking about would be holding a school board election or these school board elections in conjunction with a provincial election. Because we're mandated to do the provincial elections. So the thought was maybe to get more voter engagement and voter turnout that it's held with a provincial election, and everybody would go and get 2 ballots essentially and would be able to vote for the school board at that time. I'm not going to kind of read through this line by line. The document does kind of speak for itself a little bit, but I will talk about this one that was brought to our attention is the kind of people asking the question, is this able to be done? And one of the biggest challenges that we see around this right now it would have to be, first of all, an at-large system, because the school boundaries or zones or families of schools do not match up with our provincial districts. So the boundaries don't match up. So depending on where you live as to what ballot you would get for the school elections, there are a lot of complexities around that to make sure that you would get the right ballots. So it becomes, we would have to go to an at-large system for the school boards. And secondly, us being in a minority situation as we're in right now, what would happen if a government fell or decided to go to an election early? I know we do have fixed election dates, but it's not something that is adhered to at all times. And is that fair or right to do to an elected school board to say that if a government decides to go back to the polls after 18 months, 24 months, whatever the case is, does the school board then go with it? How does that work? Also, if you do an at-large system, there are challenges around doing a by-election, because if you did a by-election for a school board that was at-large, kind of everybody could vote, that's essentially running a provincial election with a couple of candidates, really. So the logistics around that are just something that our office really has to take into consideration. So with this here, we do kind of detail out some of the costs that go with each of these recommendations, or each of these options, I guess I would say that they are. And some of the challenges around this one here, that if we did incorporate with the provincial, we would have to look at getting bilingual workers at all of our voting locations because of the French school board portion of it. That can be very challenging for us to be able to get those workers. As I spoke about, the by-election would be an issue. The appropriate number of ballots to print, and it's an interesting thing that we would have to consider, but if everybody who is eligible to vote turns up to vote, well, we need 127,000 ballots. So we would need that for the school elections as well. Now, last time around, 420 some people voted in the school elections. So to have a little bit of waste there is just something that we have to consider as well. The number of ballots becomes a little bit challenging for us. So we would have to order all of those ballots and be prepared. It may not increase voter turnout. It's not a requirement that you have to vote, and there could be people that present to vote knowing that they're voting for their MLA or the party of their choice, whatever the case is. They're told at the time, oh, you can vote for the English or the French school boards. And they're like, well, I don't know anything about that, or I don't have kids in school, I'm not interested in that. Or it's potentially an uneducated vote, which is something that's debatable as to the merits around that as well. So those are some of the challenges there. The mail-in ballot process would have to change for us as to the secrecy envelopes that would have to be sent out, because we would essentially be sending out 3 different ballots to people, the provincial ballot, the school French, and then the English school board. So again, some logistics that we would kind of have to take into account. There are IT considerations for us to make sure that we're ready to go for something like this, and it would take us a while to make sure that we have everything in place. So this is not something that can happen overnight. And the cost for this, roughly around $100,000, is a ballpark figure for us, kind of running some numbers around this right now. So the second option that we've looked at is a standalone school board elections, both French and English, because the regulations right now for education, for the elections underneath the Education Act, they just talk about the French school board elections. So they're going to have to be totally rewritten to incorporate the English school elections. So there's room to kind of change things around if we needed to around the French side as well. Currently, right now, it's a one-day election for the French school boards. You vote from 11 till 8. We hold them in the schools. So the possibility of doing a one-day election and having the same thing for the English, or moving to what we like the standardized voting for elections, what we do for municipals, what we do for provincial, 3 advanced, 1 election day. That's something that we would be able to take a look at as well. Some of the issues around that, currently we use some of the schools to do the French vote. That's something that we're actively taking into consideration as to whether or not it's a good option for us to do. As all or some of you are probably aware, when you go into a school now, you need to check in with the office. You have to go and register because there are security issues that we need to worry about and make sure that there are safe people. COVID is a whole new world for us to consider into this as well. Also, this would be increased traffic into the school parking lots during the day when there are kids around. So as to whether or not schools are a viable option for this is something that we need to really consider and take into account. And we would have to develop zones or families of schools, or not necessarily sure exactly how that would work, but basically a boundaries commission would have to be formed to determine who would be eligible to vote in what area of the island. So that will take some time and have to be developed as well with the Department of Education. We do have some challenges around finding workers that would be something that we would have to take into consideration from our side of things as well, to run elections at multiple locations across the island for a school board election. And you can see the cost for this range between $300,000 to $400,000. And it sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but there's a lot of work that has to go in. A lot of it is wages. It's HR costs that we need to pay the workers in order to fully staff the polls. So that's another option that we put out, and that would be with the zones. Third option is standalone, paper-based, the paper ballot that you would have, an at-large system. And this would be both for French and English. And this would there would have to be some logistics figured out around this as to getting proper representation, because you wouldn't want, just for an example, if there were 10 seats on the English school board, if that's what it were to be, you wouldn't want all 10 people to live in a row in Surrey or in Charlottetown or in Tignish. You'd want some different representation from across the island. So some logistics would have to be figured out around that, but the potential to do an at-large system, because every islander who's eligible to vote, meaning you're over 18, you're Canadian, you live on the island, you're eligible to vote in the school board election. So there's 120,000+ people who are eligible to vote at these elections. So we have to be cognizant of that fact as well. So we would have to do a little bit of IT work to deal with this. It would become a little bit challenging for us on the logistical side, is to try to figure out how many ballots we would need to send out to each of the various voting locations to make sure that we had it covered. And again, this cost estimate for this is $200,000 to $250,000 to run this full island-wide election. Option number 4 is an online voting system with boundaries or at large. We could look at either option in number 4 here. Now, online voting is something that it's a bit of a buzz term. It's something that people like to talk about, but there are logistical challenges around it, although it is really gaining popularity at the smaller electoral events around the world and across the country. A lot of municipalities are moving in that direction, and of course, there is inherent risk when it comes to online voting, but the companies are gearing up for this and have the security in place. And the scale of the election really kind of helps mitigate that risk. If you're doing a school board election, there's probably not as much risk as if you're doing the full federal election or a US election. You know, as you go up in scale, the risk kind of steps up a little bit. So with this option, we would be able to, with the current computer system that is there, that is available for parents to have digital access to their kids' report cards, or I think it's the SAS system, we would be able to potentially utilize that to push out the voting system, meaning push out a register here to vote, or push out here's how you can vote, to really engage with the parents of all the kids who are in schools. So we think that that would be a very interesting option. Now, like I said, there's a lot of different municipalities across the country who have used online voting. PEI used online voting during the plebiscite. Northwest Territories is the first jurisdiction in Canada to bring in online voting as an option during their last territorial election, which was just last year. They had no security issues with it whatsoever. It worked very well. There's a pre-registration process, there are shared secrets, there's security all around it, so it did work very well for that. And this could work where we could target people by zone, meaning if, or a family of school, I use those kind of intermittently as to what the name might be for it. But this would allow for people to vote in a particular area, or if it was an at-large system, it would really just kind of open it up. The ballot would be on there and they would be able to vote online, and all of that would be run through one of the vendors that we've had conversations with. Cost for this is just a little over $200,000 in order to get it in place. And really, we would have to get to work on this sooner rather than later to make sure that we did enough testing, to make sure that things were working in the background, and make sure that everything was all right. Option number 5, the final option that we have here that we'll go through before there are any questions at all, is a vote by mail option. This is something, again, that we feel we could engage with all of the parents by either sending out digital messages through the SAS system with the schools, or having a physical document go home with each of the children from the schools. And that way the parents would be able to register. You would have to register in advance with Elections PEI in order to get your ballot. We would be able to then mail the ballots out, have ample time to get them back in. We could extend the timelines for this to have an open time to be able to vote, to be sure that there was enough time for everybody who was interested to vote to be able to get their ballots back. Everything would come back into our Elections PEI office, and we would be able to do all of the counting and tabulation there in the office. Now, the online and the vote by mail, it's an interesting thing. Some people say that could really decrease voter turnout. Now, it's hard to go down from the bottom. The last French school board election, it was 0.4% turnout, 0.4. And one of the more recent elections was 0.03% turnout for the school boards. There are a large number of acclamations in these. There just hasn't been historically a lot of engagement in this process. So this could potentially engage some more people by really increasing the simplicity. In the French school board elections, which is the only elections that anybody in our office who's there right now has run, we do some advertising for it. We put some information out at the schools. Last time we did send a letter home to every household who had a child in the French school system, and we still only had just over 400 people turn up to vote. But if we make that process a little bit easier, you can vote from home, either online or by mail. That's a potential option that we think would be worthwhile looking at. That option is around $30,000. So if cost plays a factor, number 5 might be something that you look at. But democracy comes at a price. If we want people to get out to vote and we want to have polling stations and everything, we need to make that available. All of the costs that were in there are pre-COVID. And I put that in there with a little bit of a caveat to say, let's put a little asterisk by that and the potential for a 15 to 20% increase in cost for safety measures, depending on where we are in the COVID world. As we can tell in here with distancing and glass in between and masks required in a lot of places, there are a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration that we are taking into consideration, but we would have to kind of look at all of those depending on when this would happen. Now, of course, the next school board elections aren't scheduled to be until May 2022, which seems like a ways away, but it's not that far in our eyes. We are actively needing to get ready for this because there's legislative changes to the Education Act, there's regulatory changes that need to be done, and then all of the processes need to be mapped out because this is, like for our office, this hasn't been done before. There are no boundaries or zones that are done like this. We're kind of starting from scratch a little bit. It's not necessarily resurrecting the old Eastern and Western school boards or anything. This is really taking a look at the new system to see how it needs to work. So that's a lot of information. I hope it was clear, but if there are any questions or comments or concerns or anything at all, absolutely.
Ola?
Oh, I was first?
You're fast.
Sorry. Thank you for this excellent presentation. I'm astonished how low the mail-in cost at the end is compared to, say, the cost of doing a computer thing. Could you explain a little bit why it's so expensive to do it on the internet, or if there's an upfront cost for the software where the system might be usable for other provincial legislations or plebiscites as well?
Well, on the online side of things, we produce voter information cards. They're the yellow envelope that you get before an election. That would still be part of this process in order to engage the electors. So we need to mail those out to everybody on the island in order to get them to be able to go to vote. The mail-in ballot side is a pre-registration. You need to come to us to say whether or not you want a ballot. So the online side, there is some IT configuration because While it was done in the, for the plebiscite, we do not have that same infrastructure in place. It is something that we would have to kind of redevelop and work with our current system that we use. And there are some staffing issues around that, around bilingual side of things as well, a little bit of advertising, but it's mostly the online voting platform. We're at just over $110,000 to engage a company to run that system for us. There are companies out there that do this, and that would be the bulk of the cost for that. The vote by mail system is essentially us in our office processing applications, making sure you're an eligible elector, putting a stamp on it, and sending you the ballot in the mail once it's approved. So it's relatively inexpensive based on a couple of bilingual staff and however many stamps we need. That's essentially it.
Ola?
Okay, thank you. I have kids, but currently they're all out of school, thank God. I'm just wondering what's the thought or the legality of needing every person on PEI to vote in these elections? It seems to me you could just limit it to parents and just have the schools hand out ballots, something really simple based on the parents who have kids in school. Do you care to comment on that?
Well, right now, there's a definition of an eligible voter under the education regulations. And essentially it says you meet the requirements of Elections PEI. You're over the age of 18, you're a Canadian citizen, you lived in the province for over 6 months. They have two other stipulations in there. That you are A, an eligible parent, or B, you would be an eligible parent if you had a child. So essentially, that rules out no one. Because, as I said, even my 99-year-old nanny could adopt a child and have them go to school, and if she would be a parent, she's entitled to voice her opinion. That's the definition as it stands right now. Now, some jurisdictions do it a little bit differently. In the French school board elections in Nova Scotia, you have to have a child enrolled in the French schools to be able to vote. Now, that's something that's kind of processed behind the scenes, but that's the definition as it stands today. So essentially, we deal with the same number of electors for a full provincial election as we do for a school board election, in our eyes.
Ola?
Thank you. Thank you for the answer.
I have a couple of questions. All right, I'm going to jump right in then. Whenever you said using SAS to send out information, that's a great idea. And then I started to consider the definition of voting and how it's not just going to be people who have access to Students Achieve, so that could be.
Well, the definition of eligible elector could be something that would have to be reviewed in the process of taking a look at these. And again, not for me to say, but, you know, should everybody be eligible to vote, or should it be limited to those that have children in the school system? And like I said, I don't have an answer, an opinion on that. Those who are eligible to vote, they come see me, I'll let them vote.
And so I'm wondering, whenever we look at those turnout rates, I knew they were low, but this 0.03 is shockingly low. And I'm wondering if I guess I'll ask what the French school board or what other jurisdictions do in terms of education around why elected school boards are important, why it matters, the benefits, what sort of things they have jurisdiction over. Is there any of that happens?
Not through any of the electoral side of things. Essentially, we need to make it safe, secure, convenient, accessible for people to be able to vote. But and we want 100% turnout every time, but that voter engagement is a very tricky thing to make sure that we get voter turnout. But you are correct. Any information around what a school trustee does, how do they affect the school system, what impact do they have on my kids' lives? I don't know that there's been a lot of education done out there. Now, again, that doesn't necessarily fall on Elections PEI. We need to advertise when it is, But as to all of the kind of behind the scenes, what they do and why they're important and everything, that would fall on the school system or the Department of Education or somebody to do a bit of an education campaign to say, here's why they're important and here's what they do.
Absolutely, and it wasn't until very recently that I sat down with someone who has a really solid understanding of the difference between the board and the department. And it wasn't until then that I really was like, oh, okay, something clicked in me. So I think that education piece is crucial. Not saying it falls on your shoulders,
Yes.
but that's what
I would agree 100% though.
Yeah. And so I'm kind of jumping all over the place here, but where it says for number 4 that the option will require substantial testing and to be best piloted in a smaller controlled environment. And then it was also said that a lot of jurisdictions are moving to this. Do you feel that there's not quite enough data yet to just do that?
When I say testing, we do talk about, we're very cautious about jumping into the deep end right away. But doing a smaller event to us would be a school board election. So for us, kind of on the online side of things, we talk about, as opposed to bringing it in for a full provincial or something, it would be nice to make, to kind of try it out at the school board side of things to see how many people we get, the level of engagement and things like that. But with the other jurisdictions and working with our counterparts from across the country and even some of the municipalities that have done this, I feel that we would be, this is an option that we would be able to handle within our office.
That's really interesting. So looking at perhaps the potential of moving to online voting provincially and testing it with school board elections potentially.
Well, at some point of having an online option or portion for a municipal or a provincial election in the province, I think is inevitable. As to exactly when it's going to happen, I don't know for sure. Mm-hmm. But I know it's coming in different sectors for different elections. They're doing Elections Canada and Elections Nova Scotia is doing it for military voters overseas right now, where they're able to vote online instead of getting the ballots and sent out. Now it's a bit of a pilot project to make sure it works. These are secure military computers and things like that, so they have a little bit of other protocols in place. But even the municipality like Halifax uses online voting. There are a few jurisdictions or municipalities in Ontario that it's solely online voting. There is no paper ballots, there is no in-person. It's just online voting. It's open for a particular period of time. You get to vote, and that's the way it is for all of their municipal events.
So would it be fair to say that this is kind of a direction that we're moving in, not necessarily on PEI, but in general, it's kind of the direction that we're moving in?
Slowly, but yes, yeah.
And so the estimated online, the estimated cost of this, Ola kind of touched on this, but would that be kind of like a one-time cost of that much, and then once the infrastructure was in place, it might not be so expensive in successive years? Or
no, the online voting platform would be procured per event. Each election, we call them events in the office. So that's what how it would be procured. And when we look at that, so it would be a cost per event in order to do that. Now, some of the back end that we could look at, currently right now, we're looking at, with that side of it, a breakdown. If we mailed out the voter information cards, that's a cost of about $90,000. But if we did an online where you have to be engaged and go to register, where we didn't mail you that reminder to please go and register, you can weigh that out. That's a $90,000 bill that we can say that doesn't need to be part of this, where we could reach out to the parents through the SAS system and things like that. Now, the voter cards are important to us because when you physically go to vote, you bring them. That helps remind you as to where and when you go to vote. But if we move to an online system and try to push people in that direction, anytime we do a mailer, to do an island-wide one, it's around $100,000. That's just what it's going to cost us to do that, to get those out to everybody that we need to. So whether or not we do that has an impact on the budget of this.
Right. And would this cut out, I know I'm focusing on 4, it's just kind of the one that for some reason, I don't know why. I wrote my questions on this page, I guess that's why. I'm wondering, would this cut out some of the human resources challenges you spoke to? this
Absolutely.
option?
Yeah, this would limit us to having just really a few staff in the office to help out with any phone calls, any people that would be having trouble getting registered, or if they were having issues with the system or anything like that. But as opposed to hiring, poll workers across the island, because in some of the other ones where we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, we're looking at hundreds of workers to have to hire them to go. Whereas the online side, you're looking at, maybe a handful, maybe 5 in the office for however long the writ period, the election period would be.
Okay, and you mentioned, so as we consider this SAS idea, I kind of am stuck on it because SAS now is something, especially with COVID.
Yeah.
I never got an SAS alert before this year, and now I get them on, I'm not going to say daily, but it seems like a daily, maybe weekly basis. And so it's kind of opened my eyes to the possibilities. So after hearing you say that, I've kind of jumped on it. But is that option, the SAS option, something that we could use, let's say for education purposes or for whatever, if we, in conjunction with any of these different options, or is it?
Well, potentially, but if you look at the other options, that's really making sure that every elector, it all depends on the definition of who's eligible to vote. It's an excellent option for those that have children in the school system, but those who don't, myself, and Paul, right now, like, we don't have any kids in the school system, so I don't even know anything about the SAS system. It wasn't there when my daughter was going through school, and I've never seen about it. I've only heard about it. So if we're trying to get those people, we would have to actively engage them in other ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I'd love to get a sense, and this, if this is out of the scope of what you're here to talk about, I'd love to get a sense of kind of where you see this going based on your experience. You three are Elections PEI, and you understand your challenges and where you need support and all of that stuff. So one of the things you mentioned for if we were to do this in conjunction with a provincial, which was also one of the options that was presented in our presentation from the department, was this idea of doing it in conjunction with provincial elections, which would involve a firm commitment to fixed election dates.
Well, yes, that commitment can't be made. And I say that in the way that we're in a minority situation. And in a minority situation, everybody can all agree we're going to stick to a date, no questions asked, Tim, sleep soundly. And then tomorrow happens, and nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow. That's my point.
Yeah.
So, we sometimes use some ridiculous situations in the office, but, something happens that is totally outside of what anybody thought anything was going to happen, and it's decided, no, we don't agree with this. We need the people to decide, we're going to the polls. And nobody knows if or when that could happen, especially in a minority situation. Now, going back to the fixed election dates, our next fixed election date is in October of 2023. So is the federal. That's illegal. Ours has to move until April of 2024, according to the law as it stands today, if the federal government doesn't go before then. Like, there's a whole bunch of factors that come into play. The provincial election has too much volatility to move around, minority or majority situation, to be able to tie a school board election to it. In my mind, it just absolutely doesn't make sense to do that as an option.
So if we purposely want to interfere with your sleep schedule, this is the one that we should go with.
Absolutely.
Okay. Does anyone have any? Oh, Sydney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for coming in. A couple of quick comments, and I always talk with this and it comes up a lot door to door during elections. The school board election. Sorry, in a provincial election, it comes up a lot whether or not to have school board elections at the door, and I'm always hesitant to look back and look at these turnout numbers, because it was at a time where the responsibility of the school board was different as well, and it was also under a time where there was a moratorium on school closures. That changed in the 2007 election when a lot of this was heightened, whereas the board after that was able to make recommendations on to keep a school open in a local community or to close a school. So I think there's significant context on what would drive a turnout for an election. If we had a school board election right after that tumultuous time in communities, both rural and urban and PEI, we would have seen a lot of candidates and a huge turnout at that time. And it, not unlike a big issue in a provincial election, would perhaps drive a turnout. So I think there's context around that way too, over responsibility of the board. So like I think turnout would be larger now, given the changes in governance policy for the public schools branch right now. Carla, I would be like you in focusing on I think the online option is a perfect example for school board elections, personally as well. Have you had has there been reach out from the Department of Education on this to you guys?
They did reach out to us pre-COVID, as the whole world is pre or post-COVID. So they wanted to find out from us some of the logistics around what it would mean to run a school board election, because our office hadn't run one. So what would it mean? How would we go about doing it? So we did start to talk to them, but the conversation ended very quickly because COVID happened. That took over a great deal of time for the Department of Education, and still is. So we have not re-engaged with them at any point, but we did talk to them a little bit about, they initially posed the question about tying it to a provincial election as to what it would mean. So we got to talking about that a little bit. So, but not in a lot of detail.
Sydney?
Thank you. Which of the options here would require the least amount of legislative changes?
They're all very similar because there is no mention of elected English school boards in the regulations at this point. Now, it would be minimal legislative change in the Education Act, but significant change to the education election regulations.
Sydney?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And I think, one of the things that we need is, I don't want to say more direction, but the big question mark here, I think, has to do with the public schools branch and the Department of Education as well, because we now have more ways to engage as a community towards, like before, when elected school boards was talking about, the district advisory councils weren't necessarily there, and we have people involved at that level too. I guess I'm curious, and this isn't a question for you, it's just a question for the committee in general, is where does the Department of Education see all of those different levels of governance lining up with the new elected school board as well? And that doesn't have to do with you. You just need to know yay or nay and what way you want to go about it as well.
But that work needs to be done a little bit in conjunction with the decision as to how what type of election they want to run, and then before we can really kind of get started to truly work on our side of it as well, because there's a lot of legwork that needs to be done by the department to see on the governance side of things as to how they want it, and then they can decide it, because if if they say, yeah, we like the online side, we'll work on the back end, we'll talk to you about anything that, you need to be talked about. We can then start to engage with the vendor to say, here's what we want to do, here's, our list of electors, let's take a look at the software, let's take a look in the background and kind of start that process going. But, so the two can kind of run in parallel.
Sydney?
Thank you. I know, one of my concerns, it would be regional representation versus a big open list.
Yes.
For sure, that's just my own preference. Have you submitted anything to the department about, your questions of, well, before we can go ahead, we're going to need to know A, B, C, and D?
There's been nothing formally written. We did have, I think it was one meeting with a couple of reps from the Department of Education that did say, like, there's no mention of English school board elections, so some wording needs to be drafted around that so that we have something to work on. Because even on the fact of eligible elector, because right now the only reference is to the French school boards, and as to whether or not it would be the same, they need to just decide that as to if it would be the same. But that changes our world dramatically, because right now if you're eligible to vote, you're eligible to vote, provincially you're eligible to vote in this, so we got 120,000 people and around 105,000 on our list that are currently there that we would have to engage with for this process. But if they pare it down to say, no, it's only parents who have kids or are going to have kids, and as to how the parameters, it would have to be looked at as to what they want to do. But that changes how we would then need to reach out. And it has an impact on the cost of these things as well, because a lot of this stuff is kind of per elector. So it would have an impact for us.
Sydney?
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate your comment earlier, but obviously the Department of Education has a lot of things on their plate right at this current moment too. And I'm not, like trying to add like wild pressure on school board elections, but I still feel to this day that we have a chair who's in a conflict of interest, being a deputy minister and also a chair of the public schools branch board as well. And no doubt they're doing a fantastic job and they're working, but at some point we do have to pressure the department to take action on this. To what I see is that conflict. No, I appreciate your answers. Thank you, Chair.
Gord?
Thanks very much for this bit of work. I think it's good to see these numbers, and just a few questions. Like, I got some notes here between 2005 and 2008. There was 40 different positions that were up, and these are some of my notes. But 23 out of 40 of those were acclaimed.
Yes.
So we talk about that, and then I look at the rest and I say, well, I'm looking at some of these numbers, and value for money just isn't there when you're talking about, if you broke it down per vote, what would 110,000 be per vote? It would be pretty astronomical.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, like, you have done your work with this, but there seems to be some motivation, or there seems to be something missing in engagement outside of this. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree. I think that the average person, and this is me more as an individual than, from elections point of view, but has a decent idea as to what an MLA does and, what government does for them on a provincial side and even on a municipal side. So I have a bit of an idea what my councillor does, and I know, if I have an issue in where I live, I can call my councillor or my MLA if that's, something that is appropriate to do. But for a school trustee, in all honesty, I was not aware as to what they did or what their role was within the school system or within the Department of Education or the public schools branch. Like, I do agree that I think and where there's confusion, people tend to kind of back away from that. And that's what I said about, if we did it where we kind of forced everybody to have a ballot, you're going to have uneducated voters or people that would say, I don't know anything about this or who these people are. I'm going to choose not to vote, or I'm going to vote kind of, on a whim because I like the name. And I don't know that that's, the proper way to kind of go about that. there really needs to be some education and awareness done for the public. Now, people need to be willing to learn as well, so that's a challenging side too, that, you know, but parents, I think, are very engaged in their kids going to school. They're engaged in that process. They're very invested in the education side of things for their children, and it's an important thing for them. So I think if there was a bit of a campaign done, it would benefit everybody involved, just to let people know what these people do, and that then in turn on our side could potentially increase engagement and voter turnout. Now, voter turnout is a very fickle thing, because if somebody asks why people didn't turn out to vote yesterday, there could be a million reasons, and all of them could be wrong, because it could be 1,000,001 that, you know, is the reason why it happened. So but to try to get that engagement, and we see that on all the different political levels, when, you know, there are some large topics, people tend to turn out to voice their opinions.
Gord?
No, and that's exactly what I'm looking at this, and I'm like, wow, this is a good bit of work. We've got some numbers, but there's a few pieces completely
There's
missing.
quite a few pieces missing. This is
in
one little piece to that puzzle,
Yeah, exactly.
and it's kind of at the end.
Yeah, exactly. And more logistically, as you're speaking, I couldn't imagine going around getting ready for an election and talking to somebody who's just come here, whose kids speak perfect English, parents don't, and saying, yeah, you can't don't bother voting for me, but you have to go down there and vote for the elected school director. They don't even know what this, they're struggling with just the levels of government, let alone go down there, but don't vote for this, you can't because you're PR.
Yeah.
So it's just, I look at this and I'm like, I don't know how, I wouldn't even, the plebiscite was one thing, but to have that conversation would be something else. Like, especially there's a lot of people in Charlottetown in that area. When you're looking at this, what did you do? What did you see across the country? What did you see across the Maritimes? What was some of the scope of?
Well, what's interesting is us and New Brunswick, PEI and New Brunswick, are the only two jurisdictions that deal with school board elections. Any of the other of the electoral bodies, my counterparts across the country, they deal with provincial elections. No municipal, no school board, that's it. So some other jurisdictions do a variety of different things. In Ontario, in some places, they tie them to the municipal elections. But that, again, is run outside of the scope of the Elections Ontario office. They work with the municipalities around that to ensure that it works. And as to whether or not it does, I'm not 100% sure. Elections New Brunswick, they use tabulated voting. They have a different type of ballot with a different type of counting machine. They have that infrastructure in place. They tie their voting to the hospital boards. There's a few different, their school boards are kind of tied to some other election events that the residents in New Brunswick are used to. And in Nova Scotia, it's run independently from the other, from the elections office. They kind of run it on their own, but they have different qualifications as well. So I think they do more engagement through the schools, because you have to have a child in the school system to be eligible to vote. They have a different definition for eligible elector than we do. Newfoundland, I'm not 100% sure, but it's some information that we're kind of actively looking at as well. But it's a bit of a challenge, because we just can't reach out to our counterparts. We have to do some investigative reporting on this to try to find it out, because our counterparts don't deal with this.
Gord?
And New Brunswick, that has been something they've been doing for a while, so it's more or less seamless. Do they have a big uptake on their elected?
Their turnouts are definitely lower than they are here, but it is an increase. It is far higher than our school elections, for sure. But again, it is tied to a number of different events. They have a number of different things you can vote for, all on the same ballot, and it's fed through a tabulator machine, and it's all counted and processed through that way. So it's not like you go and get 4 or 5 different ballots and put them in the ballot boxes. It's all kind of one super ballot for different type of events. But they do have a better uptake.
Great. Yeah. That's great. And I mean, when I was going around, I didn't hear much about elected school district voting when I was speaking with people, but I heard a lot about schools and the concerns of kids. So anyway, thanks, Chair.
Ernie?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Certainly appreciate it. And it would appear that different areas of the province, maybe during the last election campaign, heard more or less with regard to elected school boards. I know, and it very well may have been because of the fact that just a short time previous to that, that there was that government was looking at closing 2 elementary schools in the West Prince area. There was certainly a lot of community engagement, I'll put it that way, as a result of that. So I did on the campaign trail back in April of 2019, I did hear a fair bit about elected school boards, that we need them, that we need that voice in our education system. And I would have heard it across the board, but certainly more so from parents, without a doubt. So just with that, I'm wondering if we're looking at, and I agree with Sydney too, I think that there is a need for regional representation or regional boards. But I guess as follow-up on that, in the past or other jurisdictions that you've looked at, with regard to school boards and the trustees on those boards, are the elections and the numbers based on the population of a certain area, or is it on a geographic area, or did you take a look at that?
Well, from the past, with the French school board, of course, there are zones that are in place, and there's some maps within your package as well. And so we do the tabulation, we do the counting and all the calculations by zone. And so going back from 2005, where we had 1 election out of the 6 zones, we had 5 acclamations and 27 people voted. Now there would be around, I think it's between 7,000 and 8,000 eligible electors within that zone. So the turnout is very low. Now we did see a bit of an increase in numbers as we went through, but it we still had in 2008 we had 2 acclamations and 1 ministerial appointment. In 2014, 4 acclamations. In 2018, 3 acclamations. So even the engagement side of people putting their names forward for this doesn't seem to be very high. But we're not necessarily seeing, okay, when we do it in a certain area. Now, the Eastern and Western school boards, when we go back from 99 through 2008, we can see in the different areas as to, some numbers that were increased, maybe a little bit more people in the Eastern school boards that voted as opposed to the Western. But now, as to any of the rationale or reasons around that, I'm not sure. It was definitely before our time in the office, but we do look at it. I mean, in the past, it was the Eastern Western School Board, and we do look at it at the French zones, so we can target the areas to see the number of people.
Ernie?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for that. To follow up on something I believe that Gord had brought forward, is just with regard to the role of the school boards. And I would agree, I think a number of years ago, literally decades ago, that people were more familiar with what the role and responsibility of your school boards were at that time. And I think for whatever reason that faded away. I think that it is very important, not only potentially for ones who may be looking at putting their names forward, but the general population to know, okay, just what is the overall governance structure within our education system, and then the specific roles and responsibilities of the trustees on those boards. And I'm not sure if we have done maybe as good a job as we could have or should have on that. So I guess on that, when you look at the various cost estimates here of, whether it's 4 or 5 or what have you, that would not include any costing of advertising or public engagement or anything like that, would it?
No, that costing is solely based on our responsibility, which does come in some advertising as to, you know, the proclamation ad that has to go into a newspaper or has to be advertised, if we need to promote the returning office contact information, the election day itself, like there are certain requirements that we need to do to make sure that people know when the election is. But as to the, like, again, in a provincial election, we don't go out there and say, here are the duties of an MLA. We say, here's when the election is and how to get a hold of us if you have any questions. So yes, you know, we have a certain, and it is factored in on our numbers, our advertising budget, but it's very minimal, just to let the electors know what we're required to let them know as to where and when they're able to vote. But on the education side of things, that would have to fall onto probably the department to educate people as to why we have them, what they do, and why it's important, you know, for the schools, for the kids.
Ernie?
Okay, the last thing I have right at this point anyway, Chair, is just with regard to when we were speaking about looking at should parents who have children in the education, in the school system, in the public school system, be the only ones to that are able to vote in an election. And it's more of an observation probably than anything. But I think if we did go down that road, but we do have to keep in mind that, you know, that we have children in the system that for whatever reason may not be with their parents. They may be with a relative, they may be with a grandparent, there may be something legally backing that up, there may not be. So I think that that is something that we have to keep in mind if and when we do move forward on that. So that's more of an observation, Chair, than anything. So that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
That's a great point. It wouldn't be a committee meeting if I didn't go on a bit of a rant, so I'm going to do that right now. There was a document, I forget the exact name of it, I think it was called Charting the Way, and it's the education report on school governance, written by an impressive group of people, and they recommended 2 English districts and a French district, I believe. Through the political powers of the day, we ended up now with Public Schools Branch and the French Language School Board. And I would never be the one to suggest we change this again, because being an educator under that constant change is extremely stressful. But it ensures the autonomy of our schools when we can have local representation. And I think that that is a key piece. And, you know, as we consider the era of the helicopter parent, and I say that because I am of that era, I think that an education campaign could be very effective right now. And you know, I think that's something as the committee and as the Legislative Assembly, we look at our responsibility in that, and the departments as well. And you know, this school governance has been a bit of a political football for so many years, and I can't help but think that that could be one of the reasons why voter engagement, voter turnout is so low, although I recognize they're low all over the country, but maybe that's for the same reason. I don't know. So I guess that was my rant. Okay, so my question, I was going to ask this earlier, and don't feel like you have to answer this. I'm just wondering, ideally, if you feel that the school board elections should be something that falls under your jurisdiction, or if you believe it's better suited for another body. And if you do feel like it's suited for Elections PEI in your dreams, what does that look like?
It's an interesting question. It's within our mandate, and I'm comfortable with it. So I'll put it that way. In doing the school board elections as they are, we've always been able to get the resources that we need and the ability to do what we need to do to to pull off an electoral event, regardless as to the left or right turns that we need to take during it. So I'm very confident that we'll be able to pull off any kind of election that we need to do, and I'm comfortable with kind of running the school board elections. That being said, the options on the logistical side of things, the online voting or the mail-in ballot options are definitely more interesting to our office. Again, democracy has a cost. When we gear up for a school board election, we get fully prepared, we have people into the office, we get all of our supplies, we get everything ready. It's a great deal of work. And I don't usually get my feelings hurt, but when you have 27 people show up to vote, it's a lot of effort by a lot of people to put on an election event that has integrity, that people can rely on the results, you know, and to not have that engagement and to not have people turn up to vote. You know, we would much rather see that 100%. You know, we want everybody to turn up to vote who's able to. And there might be a better way on the school board side of things to try to reach out to people via an online platform or a vote by mail platform that would make it an easier option, a more convenient way for them to vote. And I think that might get that uptake there. And it's something that I feel that our office would be able to manage and handle that as well. So like I said, I'm comfortable in doing it. It's part of our mandate. We will run the election as, you know, we're given the instructions to do so, almost regardless as to what it is. But it comes with complexities that will have impacts on our office depending on how those elections look.
Thank you for that. And did you have a question? Oh, just stretch it. I'm just trying to think, I lost my train. Okay, so an education session, this is more of a comment, but an education campaign. So right now we've got a whole bunch of different governance structures going on, and I myself have a hard time keeping track of them all, and I'm the education critic. So I think that if people understood that with elected school boards, they actually, they don't have to go through any other powers, that they are the ones that make decisions on school-specific or family of school-specific things. And so I think even because of my enlightenment on this and deeper understanding, I think that, kind of all of us have a responsibility at the doors or with our constituents to be able to speak to the difference between the department and the board. And so we write a report for the Legislative Assembly. And so I'm wondering if there's anything else that you'd like to add, or if there's anything that we've kind of discussed here today that you might like to see us consider in recommendations moving forward.
Nothing I don't think that I need to raise at this point. I think we've kind of gotten all of our points across. What we were hoping to do with this is kind of say, here are the options that we envision are most viable, and put them out there to say, here are the kind of the pros and cons of each of them. And cost plays a factor with everything in everyday life. So we wanted to give, and of course these are all estimates as to what our best guess would be, in going through some of the numbers and things like that as to what these might cost. But we just kind of wanted to put it out there to say, here are some of the options as to how we think it could run, and some of the ways that maybe we could to increase that voter turnout. Because, like I said, I kind of talk out of both sides, but we want that voter turnout increase, although it's not necessarily our responsibility to do it. But we always are wanting, that the voters to come out.
Yeah. Heath?
Yeah, just sitting here listening, I mean, great stuff. And you're the operative, obviously. And I know last fall, I think in the legislature, there was or it might have been just before, the legislature closed, I think there was some sort of announcement that there was going to be an engagement from the department with you to look at different ways or different solutions that you presented here on how you can work together. And obviously that hasn't happened.
No, not yet. Like I said, there's kind of been some very back-end conversations to let each other know that we both still exist. But I've really kind of, especially during COVID, we really left them alone to try to figure out learning from home and then getting back to school and reopening. But in fact, this week I reached out to the department to say, listen, we are getting ready to maybe have a by-election sometime between now and March 1st. So once we get through that process, we need to concentrate our full effort onto figuring out how elected school boards are going to happen in the province, because with a year and a couple of months, really, a year and a half until the elections happen, there's a lot that needs to take place in there. So they're aware of our concern and timetable, but we haven't had that full engagement with them yet.
Heath?
I see it as an opportunity, especially the electronic voting. I mean, obviously in Prince Edward Island, it may be difficult for internet access in certain areas, but I think there is opportunities to try this. And I think this would be a great, as you said earlier, a great opportunity. Public campaign, the education component, legislation versus regulation. I mean, those are all things. It would have been nice to have the other group sitting in here today too. We could have had a really good discussion, but Department of Education. But anyway, my feelings are there is a lot of work to this, and I think the department's got a lot of work to do. I think you've done a lot of your work. I think they need to come forward now with the awareness campaign and the education component and using that communication tool through the schools. I think they've got a lot of work to do. So if there's anything, I guess, Chair, is what I'm trying to say, if there's anything in our letter, I'm not sure we'd be addressing it to these guys as much as addressing it to the department.
I would agree with that at this point.
I think they've got their game plan down, so.
Yeah. Balls in their court.
We tend to, we get prepared without knowing. Like we don't know when we're going to be called upon, but we need to be ready. I've said this to people before. We're a little bit like the fire department. They always need to be staffed and they need to have the right equipment, but you hope you never have to call them. Well, we're going to be called at some point, but we've got to be ready to be called today, tomorrow, or the next day. And so that's where we're trying to get ourselves, in all areas. But with this, it's like, okay, what can we do to be sure that once they kind of come to us with their options or their plan or their thought process, to plug into us, we're all ready to go. Like we can hit the ground running and be able to really start, regardless as to what path they want us to take. So that's what we try to be doing.
Heath? Ola?
Well, I have a question about online voting. I'm not at all in favor of online life in general. I'm looking forward to when we have less of that, but it seems like online voting is like the perfect medium for voting. You get the results in fast, you can get them back fast. So I was wondering, in your model here, how do you imagine working with the people that just don't have access, like seniors, for instance?
That is definitely a challenge. And online voting, usually, now, like I said, some municipalities have moved totally online, but when online is brought into any election, it's usually brought in as an option, not necessarily the only way to do it. So we would have to take that into consideration as to how we would deal with people. Would we, are there options for us to do mobile voting places where essentially it's a bit of a navigator, a computer that's connected online, and the ability for people to kind of go and to get assistance in getting into the online voting system. It's not perfect by any means. There are logistical challenges around that, but these are the things that we would have to kind of go and experiment with for sure to see how would we do that. But like I said, like when Northwest Territories brought in online voting, it was solely for their mail-in ballot side of things, as opposed to physically mailing out the ballots. It was you needed to apply, you needed to be able to do that. So it was an option. If you wanted to vote in person, you still were eligible to do that. But of course, with that 2 elections, if you wanted to do online and in-person voting, you just take a couple of these and add the price together and make a little sandwich, and it costs a lot more to eat.
Ola?
Well, maybe mail-in vote could offer a cheap backup as an option.
Yeah, it very well could. A mail-in ballot application in an online system is something that we could easily do, because again, the mail-in side is very simple for us to do. You apply in advance. We know how many ballots that we need to get printed. Ballots are expensive to get printed, and we have to get an abundance of ballots printed in any election that we do, because we just can't recreate them on the day of the election, so we have to be ready for it. But we would be able to know that in advance. We could have it sent out again. We could have an extended period of time for them to get back in. So a combination of options 4 and 5 is something that absolutely could be reviewed in our office.
Ola?
Thank you. I was a little bit disappointed to read about how expensive it is to do the online voting, and when you consider the hundreds of people that work in IT here and every island having, for instance, a health card, which is unique to them and stuff like that, you would just think that it would be possible to set up a system on the island that would just routinely collect votes or even ask questions and opinions on any number of things. Are we speaking to the wrong departments? Should we also be speaking to IT, for instance?
IT is not a department that we would engage with, I don't believe, on moving forward with an online voting platform. Them being a division of government and us being an independent body, we would look at getting another independent body that would work with us outside of the IT department. I don't know of any jurisdictions that have created an in-house voting system with a provincial government department running that. Not that I'm aware of. It's not a conversation that we've had with them. I can't speak to their ability to create something that we would need in order to do that.
Ola?
Well, I appreciate the need to be independent, so that's an excellent point, I guess. But is it technically or theoretically possible for your department to develop its own polling system that you could sort of, once it's set up, could use on a more inexpensive basis for whatever task at hand?
Again, it's something that we haven't actively looked into. Most jurisdictions that do it reach out to a third party. There are some companies that specialize in online voting and all of the security and everything that goes into it. I think the reason why it's so expensive is that it's extremely expensive to set up the infrastructure and the security levels in the first place. I'm not an IT expert. I can get into my Gmail. That's about it. I don't have Facebook. I'm not even sure what it looks like. It might just be a fad. I'm still not sure yet. But it is, again, it's something that we could look at. My initial impression of it would be, it would almost be like looking at trying to buy something, like to buy a car from the dealership, or going out and buying piece by piece by piece from an auto place and trying to build it yourself. You might get the better deal from the company that builds them by the thousands, as opposed to the one-of scenario where we would have to create that ourselves and then maintain some level of IT support within our office, which we currently don't have, because our entire office is here with you right now. So I don't know that that would be something that we would be, at this stage, able to facilitate.
Ola?
Or maybe the analogy is a little more like buying a car versus hiding a cap. But anyway, I appreciate your answer. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for coming in. I feel like this filled a gap and kind of gave us, as Sydney and Heath kind of alluded to, kind of a fuller understanding of where we are and where what court the ball's in right now. So I really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you for the opportunity. We're glad to, and if there are any follow-up questions or anything that comes up, by all means, we're definitely reachable.
Excellent.
And, you know, like I said, I feel that we've done a decent job to kind of getting ourselves to be as prepared as we can be to kind of take that baton whenever it comes to us, but we're just not sure what it's going to look like when it gets there. So it's there is, like you've all said, a lot of work that needs to be done in advance of us kind of taking this on.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all the work you've done.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll take a quick break to let our guests go out. All right, welcome back, everyone. And I realized shortly after we got started, I had a little note to talk to Sean about how terrible I am at welcoming my colleagues. I say welcome, but I never say your name, so I do apologize. I'll try to do better next time. So we have a review of correspondence, and we just have a few different things to look at there. So I think you all have copies. The first thing that we had was the decolonizing tourism. This must be it. Did you get that? Yes, okay. So the decolonizing tourism letter that we received, the request from Social Development and Housing for Education and Economic Growth to take that on. And so the first thing we had decided to do with that was to send that, because the language in it focused a lot around Charlottetown, we thought it made sense to send that off to the city. So Sean has done that, and he was speaking with Jennifer Gavin, and so she sent a copy to their CAO for consideration, and says they may take it up in a council or a committee of council, and that they may contact us. And again, we also had said we would look at that on a provincial level as well. And so does anybody, I was going to suggest, I don't know what this looks like, but that perhaps we keep in contact with the city and see what they're doing and what we're doing, and see how that may overlap or how we can support one another. Is there any discussion around that? Does that sound like something that we would be interested in doing? Just keeping those lines of communication open? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Okay. Great. The second thing was our request to have various groups come either before the committee or submit written responses to the reopening of schools. And so just in terms of scheduling mixed in with that, we originally had a couple of presentations that were canceled for various reasons. As a result, so QBPEI is rescheduled for October 13th. The Bluefield Advisory Council plans on rescheduling. We don't know the specific date yet. And then we received a written submission from Borley Fofana, if we're pronouncing that right. He's the Spring Park representative. And so he sent us a letter highlighting some of their concerns and some of their successes, which is great. There were a lot, kind of nothing new in here that I haven't been hearing, so that's really great. So we'll have that to discuss at some other point, but is there anything that anyone wanted to, Ernie?
Yes, just wondering, were all of the DACs contacted?
Sean?
Yes. We sent letters to all of the district advisory councils. We heard back in one respect or another from Bluefield and Charlottetown. We've got a written submission from one of the members from Charlottetown, the Spring Park entry we just discussed now, and Bluefield has been making arrangements to appear before the committee, but most of the councils haven't actually engaged on this. The invitations have gone to them, but most of the councils haven't followed up.
Ernie? That's surprising, just with different people that I've been hearing from. I wonder if, anyway, we'll leave it and see if they come back to us. Ernie?
On that, and I do agree, Chair. Is there a need or a point to reach out to them again? I don't know. I'll throw it out for thought.
I wonder, yeah. I don't know, what does Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Could you clarify what the original request to them was? Did we basically say, if you have concerns or information you'd like to share with us, please do? Or did we ask them to provide a submission? Because those are different things.
Sorry, just the noise. We gave them a couple of options. We said we'd like to have them appear before committee if they were interested in doing that. We said they could make written submissions with suggestions, ideas, concerns, whatever they happen to have as well. And both options were offered to all of the councils. And as I was saying, we've heard back from a couple of the councils, but some of the councils, we've gotten no response. So that's where we're at with those.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the clarification, and I understand where your concern is with this minister, wanting to make sure that everyone who has something to offer has the opportunity to provide feedback. I don't think there's any harm in sending a follow-up letter, just saying further to the last letter, we wanted to make sure if you had feedback you wanted to provide with us, the committee's willing and happy to receive it, and I think that's reasonable.
Yeah. Does everyone agree with that? I think that's,
Consensus.
yeah, yeah. Excellent. Yeah. And the last piece of correspondence we have is on our rural internet topic. We had sent a letter out about that, and the Deputy Minister, Erin McGrath-Goody, replied suggesting that we have some additional presenters, and she suggested that we include transportation, infrastructure, and energy, as the Bell and ExploreNet funding agreements are with that department, and she suspects they'll be a substantial part of any presentation or discussion. And so she would like to know from us if that is something that we are open to. Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a great recommendation, and we move ahead with it.
Does everyone agree? Yeah? All right. Great. Yes, Sean?
Could I get the committee to be more specific on that? She did mention there were several options. They were suggesting that they could appear transportation and their department together in a combined presentation. Transportation could appear on its own, and the economic department on its own. There's a few different ways we could go about that.
To collaborate.
Chair.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. So I see in the email back, it said, please advise if you would like us to collaborate on a presentation or present separately. It would be my suggestion that they collaborate on a presentation if they feel that they can do that adequately.
Yeah. Does everyone agree with that as well? Yeah? Okay. Yeah?
Committee consensus on
Yep.
collaboration?
Yep. And Sean, I think that's all I have on my list. Did I miss anything?
No.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, Ola.
Last year at the committee meetings, I think the school department proposed to have a public inquiry as to what should be done, in particular whether it should be elections or not. And we pointed out that they had already done that in the public with the report you just mentioned about 10, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Did something happen since then? Why have we have they suddenly decided to have elections or something like that? Because everybody's talking like that's up and coming, like this year or next.
Well, I think where it came from, and please anyone jump in, was that was part of government's platform to reinstate. Sydney.
I think it's part of the minister's mandate letter as well,
Okay.
but I could be.
Okay.
I think you're right. I think it is too. Yeah.
But the question is, do we still have those
Yes, sir.
public hearings to come that they implied they were going to have to find out what what the public wanted, even though that had been looked into already? We didn't get an answer on that.
I don't know. Sydney?
Sorry, could you clarify, where did you say, who committed to public hearings on it?
I'm sorry, I can't remember who exactly said it, but I believe it was people from the education department who said that the next step was going to have extensive public consultation to find out what people wanted in terms of elections.
Sydney?
I don't remember, sorry.
Okay.
Heath?
I made reference to my comments, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but we could get maybe the clerk to check. But in December of 2019, there was an announcement that there was going to be consultations with education, and maybe it said general public in his, relative to his comments, but I'm not 100% sure. I remember it was education, that there was an announcement that that was going to take place based on these elections, so there is something out there, but I don't know the particular, I can't remember.
Okay, and I'm guessing that those haven't taken place. But, okay. I'm not sure what to do with that. Do we? Okay.
You've got to put a motion forward, I
2022.
guess, to do something with it.
Should we maybe look at Ernie?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, we look at what our work plan has been of the committee, and certainly it was one of the things that was voted on, is one of the priorities that we need as a committee to look at, elected school boards. I'm just wondering if, I don't want us to jump the gun. In other words, I think that we have a responsibility, as a committee to report back to the full legislature with recommendations. And is that potentially going to be one of the recommendations? One of the things, too, that we heard today was just a very low turnout, at least recently. And in the public's mind, a lack of clarity of the roles and the responsibilities of trustees. To me, it would be helpful if we had a presentation, if we had information of what the actual roles and responsibilities of trustees were over the years. When we look back, they have changed substantially, did change substantially from back in the 1970s, early 80s, as it progressed through, Unit 1 School Board to the Western School Board to the English Language School Board. So there was quite a transition there. And I think as a committee, if we could have that information, and ultimately it possibly could be part of our recommendations back, that as a committee we would see these roles and responsibilities of an elected school board, and that there is a need for public input on this, rather than going out just helter-skelter without knowing what is being put back out to the public. So, my 2 cents worth.
I think that's really a good point. We'll come back to that. We'll see. Sydney wanted to say something, and then I think come back to maybe yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's up to the committee to do, to invite the department in on whatever they want to do with that. Just in response to Ola and Heath's comments, I'm looking back to, you're right, December of 2019, where there was a story in the media saying the PEI government has already started the process of reinstating an elected school board for English language schools. The schools have been in a news release Wednesday morning, the government said it had mandated the Department of Education to reinstate those elected boards. It goes on to talk about the home and school resolution from 2018. They were excited by it. The chair is quoted in the article as well. But it said the government is planning consultations with Elections PEI, education partners, and the public on how those boards might be constituted. A study of models in other provinces have already be completed. So we heard today that there was an initial reach out to Elections PEI. That's obviously been put on hold. So that consultation process of education partners and the public, I assume hasn't happened yet. And I think, with regards to what Ernie had just suggested, that along of what's the plan going forward for the department. Now, I understand the department has had a few things on their plate right now, but as I mentioned in my comments too, at some point it would be good for the committee to know the plan.
Yeah. So on that note, who would we see inviting in? Ernie, you had kind of mentioned someone to be able to explain exactly what the different roles are and what falls under their mandate.
What I would suggest would be to put back a request to the department for them to present at the committee. Certainly the department itself should know who is best qualified to do that, rather than us stating explicitly that we want this person or this person. But part of that presentation to request history over the last, whether it's 40, 50, whatever years, of elected school boards and what the roles and responsibilities of those boards were over that time period and how they transitioned.
I think that's a fabulous idea. Does everyone, Gord?
Yeah, no, I'd say the same thing, and it just in that article, it says the plan is to have a new governance model finalized by fall of 2020. So they've been obviously working on it. So, I mean, and then with that, the department will add teachers to the district advisory councils in the interim. So just to see if those have been done and when is that model going to be.
Yeah.
They have been through, they've gone through a lot.
Yeah. And
Teachers are on district advisory council.
yeah. So as far as the public consultation piece goes, where do we see that fitting in? Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. It sounds like the department is responsible for that, not our committee, right?
But asking for clarification on if that's going, would that be part of our presentation ask about what sort of public consultation will be done? Sydney?
So this committee had met with them in January, right? And asked a lot of these questions. So is it just a matter of sending a letter to them to ask what the update is in regards, we understand this was supposed to be done for this fall. We recognize that things have gone off the rails a little bit with COVID. Where are we at with that process? Like, unless there's more questions in addition to all the questions that this committee asked in January on this very thing.
Yeah. So perhaps sending a letter, seeing what we get back, and then picking our next steps from there. Does that, Ernie?
Yeah, my memory obviously is not 100% all the time, but I do not recall in the presentation any history, if you like, of elected boards over the years and what the roles and responsibilities are. Now, does anybody else recall that information?
I don't remember. I know they,
Not to that detail.
no, they
Not to-
presented the different structures or models, but they didn't talk about the history of that. Is that something that we think would be valuable in committee? Or is that part of a larger, I know this isn't in our mandate, but as we speak about the education piece of this, I don't know. Sydney?
So I'll move a motion that we send a letter to the department to ask for an update on the implementation of electric school boards in
Electric school boards, I like where you're going with
elected
this.
school boards in PEI, and an update on the consultation process to get there. And I think, given discussion on that motion, is that I'm not a regular member of this committee, but I do know you have a full schedule, I believe, of priorities. You get that feedback back. I would put a date for a response. We would like a response by this date. and then see where they're at, and then you very well may want to invite them in to present. But while the committee is doing the other thing, priorities this fall, they're coming back to you with an answer.
Is everybody okay with that? Yeah? Okay. So, Sean,
Just to Sydney having put that as a motion.
electric school boards,
I'm picturing sort of a Jetsons.
cutting edge.
Eastern slang.
But since it was brought as a motion and taking it as elected rather than electric,
I would,
do we have a vote on that, or did we just take that as consensus?
Yeah, everybody good with that? Yeah.
Consensus,
All right.
okay.
Yeah. Are we good with that? All right. Okay, anything, so, we're good with correspondence. Anything under new business? No? With that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Ernie Hudson, thank you very much, everybody.